First of all, thank you very much for inviting me to come. I've been here a number of times, going back to the late 1970s, early 80s, and I've always enjoyed coming to your territory. I wanted to talk about what the government of Canada is doing right now in relation to our lands and our territories, and the legislation that they're proposing to pass to do that, and how they're manufacturing the consent, using our own people to give the appearance that we're agreeing with this. So I just want to read something, because people might remember the 1969 White Paper. In 1969, the Government of Canada produced a paper on Indian policy and what it said. And what the federal government proposed at that time would be to transfer jurisdiction and services from the federal government to the provinces. And they say propose to the governments of the provinces that they take over responsibility for Indians that they have for other citizens of in their provinces. The takeover would be accomplished by the transfer to the provinces of federal funds normally provided for Indian programs, augmented where necessary. The paper goes on and it says the government proposes to negotiate with the province and conclude agreements under which Indian people would participate in and be served by the full programs of the province and local systems. So what the government is doing, I'm going to draw on the board here. What the government is doing, I would draw a longhouse if I could do that, but I don't know how to do that. So I'm going to draw a teepee. So here we were, minding our own business on Turtle Island, and, with all our inherent authority, our territory, our own government, our own legal system, our ability to make treaties or agreements with other nations, our own education system, Everybody has an education system, otherwise how would we exist here for thousands of years, hundreds of thousands of years without that? We had our own health care, we had our own social system of taking care of our people. So we had everything. We have the inherent authority to do that. And so this is what it was like the day before they arrived. The day after they arrived, we still had that. What the government, Canada was created by this crown. In Great Britain, they created, through an act of the British Parliament, they created Canada. Canada is not a nation. Canada is a state. It's an artificial entity. It was created by the British North American Act. They call it BNA Act, 1867. Under the British. So, Canada doesn't have its own legal system. They use the French and the English system, not unlike our laws. They don't have a real government structure. It's based on the British system. We have our own governmental structure. Like the government we have amongst the Cree peoples is very different in some ways from the Haudenosaunee government, but we still, understand the inherent responsibility that we have. Their government is created based on something that comes from across the other side. So they don't have the territory, because the territory that they're occupying is our territory. And I think the last time I was here, when was I here last? I think a year ago. Something very significant has happened since then. In February of this year, in 2012, Canada was before the Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination in Geneva. They have to make an annual report. Every so many years, Canada has to make a report to CERD on what they were doing. But in there they had written a paragraph related to our lands. Under international law, Canada, because they're saying that they have title to our lands, they are obligated under international law to produce the document that says this is our title. They have to produce that. So in the CERD meeting in February, they were asked, what document are you relying on to have title to the lands of the Indigenous nations that are now within the state of Canada? What document are you relying on? Canada did not answer. They did not answer because there's no document. They cannot produce it. But the obligation is on them, because all we have to do, oh, I guess I shouldn't touch the mic. All we have to do as Indigenous nations and say, we were here before at the time of contact, and this is our territory. Now the other side has to produce this. So what happened in the CERD meeting was that Canada didn't answer. So the expert from Great Britain, his name Patrick Thornberry, says to Canada in the meeting, so if you cannot produce title to the land, how much of the resource wealth does the Indigenous nations get from the lands and resources of their territories? 100%? 90%? 80%? They went all the way down to zero. Canada would not answer. So they do not have jurisdiction over our lands and territories. They don't. So that's very clear. So Canada is a state. But what happened, let me tell you what happened, just as a sidetrack. Canada has 3 months from the CERD meeting to provide written response. So they had February, March, April. Well, I think they gave them March, April, May. So they had till the end of May to respond. They didn't. So the CERD committee delegated Dr. Amir, who's the expert from Algiers, to come to Canada, and he did come. And I think he also came to Kahnawake in June. And he tried to meet with Canada. Well, he came to the west, and then he came back to the west or east, and he tried to meet with Canada, and Canada refused to meet with him. Just refused to meet with him. And I was talking to him on the phone because I didn't travel with him. One of the chiefs from Western Canada did. And I was talking to him on the phone, and he said, you know, Sharon, he said, they think that they can just ignore me. They think they can just not meet with me. He said, they forget I'm appointed by the General Assembly. And I will report to the General Assembly about the way I've been treated here. He said, so if Canada thinks they're going to get away with something, they got to think again. And there's been some funny little things happening to Canada. I don't know if you guys watch the news very much, but at the Rio Summit, Rio Plus 20 in Rio de Janeiro in June, all of Canada's confidential documents related to the negotiation on the environment somehow got leaked to the media. Don't know how it happened. Wasn't us. There was a meeting in London on security issues. All their confidential documents got leaked to the media. So, you know, Canada is mad now at the UN. You know that Harper wouldn't go there to the UN last week. He's like a little spoiled child, you know. He says, I'm not going, I'm pouting. And so he sent Baird, you know. They have, you know, they're thinking that they can say, well, you know, the United Nations has no authority. But the problem is that the record is there. And what Amir did when he left Canada, because not only was he appointed by CERD to come here, and they report to the General Assembly, is that the High Commissioner for Human Rights had also authorized him to travel and make a report to her. He wrote a 100-page report about what he saw here in this country, 100 pages. So, you know, the issue of lands and territories is very much alive within the UN psyche, and we have to use that. I told the chiefs a couple of weeks ago at a meeting, Canada cannot produce the paper that says they own our lands and resources. Every time that Canada says they made a trade agreement with somebody, the chief should say, You have no authority to do that. And so I saw Chief Derek Nepanak from Manitoba yesterday in Ottawa. He's from the Bear Clan, just to let you know. Just us bears are trying to stick together. Anyway, he told me that he wrote a letter to China based on what I told him and said, you know, you made an agreement with Canada on trade, but you're talking about our lands and resources, just to let you know. And he CC'd a copy to Harper. So they're going to start doing that. The chiefs are going to start sending these letters out. So Canada is a state. It's an artificial entity created by the British government. They also have underneath them something called provinces. Provinces in international law do not have any jurisdiction at all. They cannot make treaties. They can't do anything. And there was a very famous court case not too long ago, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, where the province of British Columbia tried to sue the United States government over salmon fishing because of the quotas and stuff like that. So the province of British Columbia went to court and tried to sue the American government. Canada joined with the United States and said that our province couldn't sue the United States because the province does not have any international personality. So that's pretty clear. So they don't have the jurisdiction, they don't have the authority. But what they're trying to do is Canada, and Harper is accelerating this process, I have to tell you. I had a meeting in August with Senator St. Germain, who is going to be retiring in, I think, November this year. He's a Métis senator from British Columbia. He said to me, you know, Sharon, he said, you guys are in for a rough ride. There's a lot of legislation pending, including an Education Act. And I'll get to that in a few minutes. But what is this legislation designed to do? Like, there's 8 pieces right now that are either drafted or have already been introduced in some form. We have the water legislation, the matrimonial property legislation. We have that Rob Clark legislation. That's the private member bill. We'll talk about that in a minute. Maybe I'll just talk about it now. What Rob Clark is introducing is that he is going to gut huge sections of the Indian Act. And if you want, I can send an email to somebody with, I did a little chart of the sections that got taken out of the Indian Act. And what they're doing is, what they're taking out of the Indian Act right now is the sections related to education, in preparation for a federal Education Act. And the other part of it they took out was wills and estates. Wills and estates, if they're not in the Indian Act, will be in the province. So the provincial person that deals with wills and estates, if you die without a will, there's somebody in the province who comes in and makes decisions about property and all that sort of stuff and who divvies it up. They're taking those sections out of the Indian Act and allowing the province to move into the jurisdiction. So there's that. There's the proposed Education Act. There's the Health Act. There's the privatization of lands. In the summer, when everybody was at the lake boating around, or whatever people do in the summertime, Harper announced that there's going to be privatization of lands. Taxation. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. There's another one. No. I'll think about it. Anyway, this legislation is, the water bill has been introduced already. I think twice before, and it got defeated, and it's back again. Matrimonial property was done they defeated it 3 times, they put it back in. The Rob Clark legislation is, oh, I know what it is, the accountability. Because of course, you know, we don't account for anything, you know. We never write a report to deal with monies. We write more bloody reports than anybody in the world. Anyway, Rob Clark's legislation has already gone through second reading. It's this is a private member's bill. I don't know if you follow what Harper's doing in Ottawa. But what he's doing is he uses the private members' bill legislation to push things that are the least are very controversial, but they put it through a private members' bill, and so it doesn't go through the standard process of consultation and all that sort of stuff in the mechanism, because it's a private members' bill and the government is not obligated. So that's past second reading, going towards third. The Education Act. Well, I'll get to that because that's what we're dealing with in Ottawa. The Health Act, this is very dangerous. Privatization, Harper says that the lands, your reserved lands should be privatized so that you can have more economic opportunity. So you can, alienate your lands and lose. Taxation, everybody pays taxes. And accountability is that every cent that ever received in your First Nation will be dealt with accountability. Now, I looked at this accountability stuff, and it's actually based on the Nisga'a model of the Comprehensive Land Claim in British Columbia. And the Nisga'as in British Columbia gave up their land, they gave up their tax exemption, they imposed taxes on their people, and they're privatizing their lands for sale. And the accountability is what's built into their Nisga'a agreement, and it's being rolled out as legislation at the federal level. So what the government is doing is they're taking bits of this pieces of our inherent authority, and they're bringing it over here underneath the provinces and under this jurisdiction under here. Once it comes underneath here, all this moves over here. Canada now, if you read the 1969 white paper, they do away with 9124 in the British North American and Indians and lands reserved for Indians. That section will be gone. So what they're doing is they're frustrating the application of 9124 by transferring this stuff to the provinces. And they're doing it through all kinds of mechanisms. It's not only through legislation, but it's through the contribution agreements. I don't know if people study the contribution agreements like I do. I've got nothing to do at night, and I'm thinking I'm kind of like, maybe I need something to read, something to take care, make me go to sleep. Let's read a contribution agreement. And what these contribution agreements are doing is this. They are moving us into line with the reporting system of municipalities. So all of the criteria in those agreements now are coming in line with municipalities. So for example, it says recipient. And it says recipient means anybody within the First Nation, whether you're Indian or non-Indian, can receive services. Now, this is a very dangerous situation, because if you have services from a First Nation, and you want to now say, I don't like the way this school is running, because I don't like my children the way they're being taught, and I'm not a member of the band, but I'm receiving a service. I want to now sit on the board of directors. I want to have a vote. I want to have a say. So what they're doing is they're opening up the door, because that's how they that's how they negotiate self-government agreements. I know because for 10 years I was a chief negotiator in the Northwest Territories, and they tried every which way to impose a municipal style structure on the Dene, and the Dene said no. So we had many, many fights at the table about it, and I said one day, why do you want non-Dene people to be able to participate in the Dene government? Why? Because it's really moving them over here so that the government can go back over here. I said, why are you doing this? And the guy says, This is the government guy says, well, maybe to build sidewalks. And I was sitting with these Denny negotiators, and one guy just started laughing. He's almost hysterical. And I said, okay, we're going to take a break here because, we need to. So we take a break, we go outside, and I said, what are you laughing about? And he said, oh, yeah, the government came into this is a flying community. He said the government came in there one spring. They had a load of lumber on the plane. They took all the lumber off the plane, and they went through the whole little village, built wooden sidewalks all over town, and then they left. He said, they didn't even ask us, do you want wooden sidewalks in town? He said, we watched them, they built these wooden sidewalks, and they left. I said, I don't remember seeing any wooden sidewalks in your community. He said, oh no, he said, once the snow came, he said, we went out and chopped them up and burnt them. He said, that's why I was laughing when they said sidewalks, like, sure, bring them on, we don't have to go out and make any more wood, chop wood for a while. But that's the structure of what they're trying to do. And so what they're doing, and I'll get into this thing about what's going on in Ottawa right now. There's a National Chiefs meeting on education. It was not supposed to be a Chiefs meeting. Originally, it was comprised of, there was supposed to be a national meeting on education, period. Because what happened last July at the meeting in Toronto, AFN meeting, is that they tried to pass a resolution calling for Canada, the state of Canada over here, to pass a National Education Act where the jurisdiction of the schools and the land under the schools would then go to the province for more funding, right? And they did this in British Columbia in 2007. So on November 22nd, I think I sent a copy to Joe of the legislation. November 22nd, 2012, or 2007, sorry. Can't have 22nd, 2012, it hasn't happened yet. Unless I'm the Mayan calendar. Canada passed legislation. And what they did is they lifted the lands of the schools and the schools out of 9124 lands. They lifted them up. And they held them in the air, so they're not protected anymore by the federal government. And on November 29th, 2007, British Columbia passed legislation accepting those land and schools into the province. So what they achieved was a constitutional amendment. They changed the designation of the land and they moved it into the province. Now what happened since 2007 is the Indians in British Columbia, who established, with the funding of the government of Canada, established all these, committees under the band councils, and they established education boards, and then they signed an MOU with the province, and then they did another subsidiary agreement with the federal government, the three parties, and the province and the Indians drafted, legislation and all this sort of stuff. So they got the Indians to agree in British Columbia that this would happen. They also did the same thing in the Maritimes, by the way. So once they transferred the lands and the schools to the province, the federal government has done nothing. They haven't given them a cent for implementation. Now they're saying to them, if you want it, we can go into negotiations with you, but you Indians have to come up with what they call OSR. That's a new buzzword in Ottawa. Own source revenue. You have to come up with your own source revenue that you contribute so much money to these schools, and we may match you. May, because it's a big may. So they're not implementing this agreement, but why? Once you give up your jurisdiction, what impetus do you have for the federal government to fund anything? Nothing. Because in the white paper, it says, the government proposes to negotiate with the province and conclude agreements under which Indian people would participate in and be served by full programs of the province and the local system. The Indians would participate, which is what the Indians did exactly in this document. Now, what's happening at this meeting in Ottawa is these Indians from British Columbia and the Maritimes, the Mi'kmaq, are saying, we need national education legislation. Why do we need national education legislation? Because if we're all in the same boat, the federal government will feel more obligated to fund us. There's some kind of weird logic about that. But that's what they're trying to do here in Ottawa. And they're trying to manipulate the situation so that it gives the appearance to the government that the people that are at this meeting agree with this process. So that's what I'm talking about, where they're using people to manufacture the appearance of the consent. So that's, then like Diana Steinhauer, my friend, my fellow Cree lady there, her and I were in a drafting meeting till 8 o'clock last night in Ottawa, trying to make sure that they don't draft a resolution to accomplish this task. Now they're in a meeting tonight in Ottawa, who knows what they're doing. But anyway, so this is what, they're trying to move this idea. They think that if they move education under the federal government, that they will get something. But once you put your education under the federal government, do you think the government of Canada is ever going to give it back to you? Do you think they'll ever release that? And in the legislation, if you look at the legislation that was drafted and passed by Ottawa, the lands and the schools can be sold or alienated to raise revenue. And I said to our people, I said, if you have a school in your reserve, and down the road, like in Wetaskiwin, or in Alberta, I'm talking about Wetaskiwin or Ponoka, which are two little communities on either side of these reserves. Do you think that the province is going to say, oh yeah, we should sell this school in Wetaskiwin to raise money to build a better school for the Indians? Do you think that's going to happen? Or they're going to say, let's sell the school and the land and the reserve so we can build a better school for our people? What's going to happen? My experience, sorry to say this, I have never known them to feel that they're obligated to do anything good for us. That's my experience. I might be wrong, but that's what I think. So they're setting in place a process where education, they want to shift the inherent education under the province. And the only thing that they can talk about is money. Everybody that spoke at the meeting in Ottawa only talks about that this could produce more money, because there's no evidence of that. There's absolutely no evidence, because if you look at the British Columbia, what's going on in British Columbia, and a couple of them got up and said, this is not really working for us because we don't have the money to do what we're supposed to do. They don't want to talk about language and culture. And so if you don't want to talk about language and culture, and you don't have your language, how do you talk about your territory or your government structure? So they want to do away with this side of the equation, and they want to bump up this side of the equation, but they cannot do this without our consent. That's what's really important here. They have to get our consent. And just in British Columbia, in 17 years, the government of Canada has spent $3 billion. They didn't put $3 billion into British Columbia because they like those Indians more than us. They put it there because they think they can accomplish something. In the health area, I don't know if people are aware, but last October, the government of Canada transferred to a super health board within British Columbia $380 million for health care. Now that sounds like a hell of a lot of money, $380 million. But when you think there's 196 bands in British Columbia, $380 million is not a lot of money. And they have to provide the services to their people for that amount of money, and that money is capped. what happens in the future. And they're really promoting this because they're talking about a National Health Act that will transfer, all of this related to health over to the province over here. Because you have to remember the white paper, what it said, that Canada proposes to negotiate with the provinces and conclude agreements. The Assistant Deputy Minister that spoke yesterday morning on education, she says, we've been negotiating with the provinces about agreements as to how this is going to roll out, I think is the words that she used, how it's going to roll out. So what are the people in Ottawa right now doing, First Nations people? The chiefs in Saskatchewan, the chiefs in Manitoba, the Anishinaabe chiefs in Northern Ontario, the Robinson Huron chiefs, and the chiefs in Alberta are saying that they don't accept Education Act, the idea of a National Education Act. But the way they rolled it out this morning at 8:15 or 8:45, while everybody was in caucuses, the guy gets up, the chair of the meeting says, can we have a motion to adopt the rules of procedure here? So some chief from British Columbia jumps up and says, Chief so-and-so of British Columbia, I move to adopt the rules of order. Next thing, another guy jumps up and says, Chief such and such from British Columbia, I second the motion. Guy looks around and says, any objections to that? I see none. Carried. And what do the rules say? That they're going to try to move this, they can move it by consensus. So tomorrow morning is going to be one hell of a meeting. But we got a little gift for you, Diana and I. We're giving you a copy of all the documents, including the draft Education Act that AFN has. So it's on the memory stick. We're giving it to you. It's actually Diana's. I left mine in Ottawa, but she's giving it up to you. So you can have this. You can read all the horrible details yourselves. And one of the other document I want to leave with you is Chief Wallace Fox from Onion Lake. They have a Cree immersion school also. And Chief Wallace Fox was the chief that hosted Dr. Amir when he came to Canada. He's the one that extended the... Oh, thank you. Thank you. Extended the invitation to Dr. Amir to come. And they have a Cree immersion school. And so when the students from the Cree immersion school came to the meeting and they sang in our language the songs for morning, the morning songs. And it moved Dr. Amir to tears. Actually, he started crying because they were so powerful, these young people. And so what the chief had this document read out, and I'm going to leave a copy with you today. He had it read out by one of his proxy chief because he's not traveling. I'll tell you why he's not traveling in a minute. He said, we are placed here on Turtle Island, our place of creation. Our nations received our original instruction to take care of the creation. For hundreds of thousands of years, our ancestors have been carrying out the instructions of the creation. We educate our children in the proper respect to be shown to all things. We teach our laws and government to care for our territories. And then he goes on and outlines a number of things, and he said, Onion Lake cannot accept legislation over our right to education. Onion Lake cannot agree that a meeting to discuss this issue can make any resolution to accept legislation. This is a violation of our right to free, prior, and informed consent. No organization or a number of delegates at a conference can make these decisions for our nation. If this occurs, Onion Lake will be forced to take steps to protect ourselves from the governments of Canada and the province and against the national organization who are paid to manufacture the appearance of consent from our nations. If litigation is necessary to stop these actions, we are prepared to take those steps. In conclusion, I commend each citizen of our nations to look at their original instructions before jumping on the federal bandwagon, which is going over the buffalo jump. So tomorrow, Chief Fox is having a strategy discussion meeting in Saskatoon with chiefs who are prepared to take action, not only on this legislation, but on all the stuff that's going on here, because they feel that they have to stand up and make themselves vocal and known. So that's what they're going to be doing, and the chief said to provide you, if you want to know if you're not alone, so to speak. This is being discussed nationally, and this is a copy of the statement that was read in this morning to the people. We had a copy, actually that's Diane's copy also. I took it off her because I didn't bring any paper with me. So there's going to be, there's going to be action, because we cannot stand by and allow the government to think they can take our lands and resources and to do away with our people. Because without lands and resources, we are really, who are we? And how do we carry out our original instructions? That's the question. Because one of the things that they're trying to do at this meeting in Ottawa is they're trying to say, well, like look at the Maori experience in New Zealand. They have their language. They have schools in the Maori language. They even have university classes in Maori language. I said, yeah, but the Maori have no land. Because the government over the years has taken every piece of land that the Maori have. And they privatized their land. And when the Maori couldn't pay the taxes on their private lands, the land was lost. And so the Maori are living in the cities, are still living in the cities. Because in 1980, the old people there said, we have to regain our language. We have to reteach our language to our young people so that we can retake our territory. But what the government did is they got a hold of the program and they started to regulate it and say, well, you're a qualified Maori teacher, you're not a qualified Maori teacher, this institution is not qualified, but this is. And what they did is they got control of it, and so yes, people are learning the Maori language, but they're not talking about regaining access to their territory anymore. And so the Maori example is not a good example. And that's what I said yesterday at the meeting. People were not too happy with me, but actually people didn't even want me to speak at the meeting because they said they already know what I was going to say, so why would they listen to me again? But some of the chiefs in Saskatchewan insisted that I be allowed to speak, so I did. But the other example they gave was the Hawaiians. And the same thing in Hawaii. And I was a judge in the tribunal in Hawaii in the 90s. And we went to every island in Hawaii and we listened to the people. And it was really, really pitiful. It was so awful to hear the people talking about how they couldn't even go down to the water to be in the water because the water was, designated as a private beach. And we had these old people, Hawaiian people, coming to the there was 9 judges. We were from around the world and we were listening to this, and they were crying. And in 8 days, we only slept 24 hours in 8 days, because we said, as judges, we said, we will listen to everyone who comes here to talk. If you want to tell us what happened to you and your loss of your land, we will listen. And we did. We listened every island we went to. Sometimes we would sleep only 2 hours a night because we listened to everybody. But they lost their land. And so now they're trying to regain their ability to fight for their land. They're starting with their language. But again, they don't have the land. And so we cannot give up the jurisdiction over what little land that is recognized, quote unquote, recognized by the state. And I think what we have to do is to push out and say, like what Chief Nipanak has taken up and sends a letter to China and says, they don't have title to this land, it's our land. And what you should be making agreements with us. And we have to start doing that. We have to start asserting our jurisdiction, because that's our responsibility. We were placed here on Turtle Island with a responsibility, and we need to do that. And if we don't do that, what's going to happen to the future generations? We're going to be like those people in Hawaii, in some future date crying to somebody to listen to them. We don't need to go there. I remember I was in New Zealand last year, and I was driving in a car. I was going to this meeting, and there's a young lady in the car. And I was sitting in the back seat, and she's in the front seat. And they were driving, and she's like, this used to be our land, you know? I said, this still is your land. And she said, no, it's not. She said, it belongs to so-and-so farmer. And I said, no, it's still your land. You still have responsibility to that land. You are still obligated. She said, I don't understand what you're talking about. And I thought, oh, this is really sad, you know? So, you know, we have a chance now. I still think we have a chance because I'm always the eternal optimist. I think we still have the chance to do something to protect ourselves, you know? And that's what Chief Fox and other chiefs are talking about. We have to stand up. And the ladies this afternoon at the meeting before I left there, they said, if necessary, the women were going to stand and yell to not allow a vote to go forward. They said they will do everything they can in the meeting to stop the vote. And if they have to stand up on the floor and yell and throw things and do whatever they need to do, because they're talking about the future, it needs to be done. So the other thing that they said is that the chiefs are saying if they try to push this through, that they're going to move to impeach Atleo, shut down AFN. So that's kind of the discussion that's going on now, because this is a very serious situation that we find ourselves in, and we need to think seriously and act seriously. So that's what's going on jurisdiction. I think, personally, there's no evidence to support this, but this legislation that was passed in 2007 by the federal government, if they get a green light tomorrow from this meeting, they can introduce legislation that makes amendments to this legislation. And all they got to do is remove the words in British Columbia out of the legislation, and it'll apply nationally. That's what I'm afraid of. Because there's no indication at all that these people, Harper's people, have any love for us or respect for us. So that's what I'm worried about, this legislation. Because if they do that, we're going to be really, really fighting for our jurisdiction and our schools. Because they're going to shove us into the province, and they're going to accomplish what they said in the white paper. Only one service deliverer, and that's the province, it's not our nations. You know, and that's where they're pushing us towards. And there are our people who are cooperating with this. Because in British Columbia, they moved that. Rob Clark is actually, quote unquote, a First Nations person from Saskatchewan. The matrimonial property stuff is being pushed by the Native Women's Association of Canada. The water legislation is being pushed by various chiefs, including the Kainai chief. And the reason I can say this is because I am a member of the Kainai tribe, which is the blood tribe in the Blackfoot Confederacy. I married in there. For my sins, I married into the blood tribe. In 1986, the government came to the tribe and said, we want to buy your water. We'll give you $60 million for your water. I argued against it. I said, no, we cannot sell our water. And they said, everybody will get $2,500. They said, there's you, your husband, and your son. You'll each get $2,500. Think about it. I said, yeah, but what's my great-grandchildren going to do with $2,500? Nothing. Because it's not going to probably be even there for them. I said, I can't agree with this. Anyway, there were just a few of us, we said no. They voted because they're giving up your right, You're giving up your treaty right to water. You're giving up your right to water. They voted, the tribe voted overwhelmingly to give up the water. There was not 1 cent ever distributed to the members because they owed $16 million in CMHC loans. They owed money for the cattle operation. They owed money for something else. And all these creditors that were owed money by the Kainai, They came in, they got orders from the court saying that this money, as soon as it was released from Ottawa, they would attach itself to it. The people to this day have never received 1 cent, not 1 cent. But the biggest proponent of the water legislation is the chief of the Kainai. He's promoting this water legislation, you know? So, same thing with privatization, Manny Jules, Mr. Taxation, you know? How do you know Manny Jules sold out? He's got a dollar sign implanted on his head. Privatization, as soon as Harper said that, the next day Manny Jules was in the press saying it's a great idea because it's good for business. You privatize the land, it's good for business. Like, where's the evidence to support that? There's absolutely no evidence to support that. And he's the taxation guy. He's the head of the Indian Taxation Office. And accountability, you know, Canada paid that group out of Winnipeg that went across First Nations, and they said that people are not accountable for the funding, so they need legislation. So the Canadian Taxpayers Association funded that little group. So, you know, there are our own people who are manufacturing and giving the government what appears to be the consent to go ahead. That's what it looks like, you know. So they're using our own people, and that's, oh, Joe's got the paper. That's exactly what they said in the white paper. Indians will participate in this, and that's exactly what they're doing here. So this legislation can pass fairly quickly because they're the majority, and we need to have alternatives, you know. We need to have a strategy for what we're going to do, and I think it has to be, well, unfortunately, when I was growing up, my grandmother told me, and the old people used to talk about, that there's going to be a lot of people that lives on reserves, the lands are going to disappear. She said to me. And there are only going to be a few places that are going to be left. And I can actually see that how that can happen. Because people are so caught up, they think that money is the answer to their problems. And so they're prepared to do whatever they can do to get that money. And if it sells out the future, it sells out the future. They don't really care about that. All they think about is whether or not they're going to get the dollar. And that's what happened at the Kainai. Like when I try to talk to people about, what about the water for the future generations? I need a new vehicle, I need a better dishwasher, I need whatever I need. You know, they needed something right now. But what are you going to do? You can't have a dishwasher for 100,000 years, you know? Like, it's really stupid what people think about. Anyway, so this is what's going on. I said I would only talk for an hour, so I'm at the end of the hour, so thank you.